So big news, we have no less than 5 new product announcements from Nikon today. In fact, we have a battery grip. We have the Nikon Z50, which is a DX format Z camera with the Z mount. We have 2 new lenses that are dedicated for the new DX Z mount. And we have the beast, the NIKKOR 58mm f/0.95 S Noct lens. So we got a lot to cover. Let's get straight into this. So first of all, we have the battery grip, which is the MB-10. This was one of the big complaints at the release of the Z6 and the Z7, and while this does not fix the single card slot issue, it does fix the power issue, and as Nikon are saying, by CIPA standards, this is going to give you just a little less than twice the amount of battery life for shooting and video work on your Nikon Z6 or Z7 camera. It takes 2 batteries. I think it's going to be a really nice addition. Now let's move on to the Z50. The Nikon Z50 is a DX or APS-C size sensor camera that uses the Z mount. You can see that the camera is just almost the same size as the mount because it's really big. This features a 20.9 megapixel sensor. It does not have in-body image stabilization, but the new lenses that we're going to talk about in a second both support VR. Now the significant part of this is now we have one mount on the Z cameras, which now covers the FX and DX size sensors, and you can also use the FTZ adapter, which gives you access to pretty much every Nikon lens ever made with just a few exceptions. The Z50 shoots 14-bit RAW images, supports shutter speeds up to 1/4000th of a second. Flash sync speed is 1/200th of a second, and you probably noticed this is the first Z camera to have a built-in fill flash. The top continuous shooting speed is 11 frames a second. It has the standard hybrid phase detection contrast autofocus system with 209 selectable autofocus points. The Z50 supports 4K video at 24, 25, and 30 frames a second. If you bump down to HD at 1080, it will support video frame rates up to 120 frames a second. This is with audio. This does have the same built-in slow motion modes that the Z6 has, although I'm not a big fan of these. They don't have audio. They're done in camera. I think you're going to get the best resolution, and 120 frames a second is pretty incredible at 1080, even if you upscale it. Now, there is a mic jack, but due to size restrictions, there is no headphone jack. The Z50 is a super compact size, so it also required a new battery designed specifically for this camera. The camera features a single UH1 SD card slot, which goes up next to the battery in the battery compartment. It has a minimized button layout when you compare it to the Z6 or the Z7. So for instance, there's no joystick, there's no video switching, and some of the functions have been moved to the touchscreen, but everything for the most part is here. It's just in a reduced form factor. Now, speaking of the touchscreen, well, we do have a flip screen, but it flips down. So if you're using a tripod, I'm not sure how you're gonna deal with that, but for hand holding, it looks pretty good. We also have 2 new dedicated Z-mount DX lenses. The first one is the NIKKOR 16 to 50mm f3.5 to 6.3 VR. This is a super compact collapsible design. It's almost pancake, and it is a DX lens with 9 elements in 7 groups. There is 1 ED glass element and 4 aspherical elements. The second lens is the NIKKOR 50 to 250mm f4.5 to 6.3 VR. This is a DX telephoto zoom lens with a really long range, but still small and light enough for portability. It features 16 elements in 12 groups. There is 1 ED glass element. The minimum focusing distance on this is interesting too. It's not too bad. It varies from about 1.64 feet to 3.29 feet, depending on what focal length you have this set at. And finally, we have the beast, the NIKKOR Z 58mm f/0.95 S Noct lens. This is a lens that's been teased for about a year now. When the Nikon Z6 and Z7 were released, there was a lot of stuff that was made out of this whole mount, and why a larger mount meant you could get a larger aperture on your lens design. Now, we haven't really seen a whole lot of that in the Z lineup, but we have now. Here's your lens. This is an $8,000 manual focus lens. It is extremely heavy. It's very expensive, but it also looks pretty incredible. So note the tripod collar attachment. You're going to need it. This lens weighs about 4 pounds. It features 17 elements in 10 groups. It's got 4 ED elements and 3 aspherical elements. It has an 82mm filter size, so this is pretty big glass for a 58mm. And of course, coming in at just under $8,000, this will be very limited, in fact, far too limited and impractical for most people to own, but as a rental, it could be interesting as a technical lens for specific applications, though the seemingly improvised model shots look like a little bit of a stretch. The sample images do look really good, even the Astro images. So all in all, this was a pretty big day for Nikon. I was joking earlier saying that they've increased their lineup on the entry level as well as the top end with an $8,000 lens. But let's take the Noct lens off the table for just a second. I'm sure it will be incredible. It's not a practical lens that people will want to buy. As I mentioned, renting it could be a different possibility. However, let's look at the DX format with the Z50, because I think this was a really interesting addition to Nikon's lineup. There's no doubt in my mind that Nikon will sell a ton of these. I think the price point's right. These will ship in October, so it's going to be here before the holidays. This is for somebody who wants to get into mirrorless on the entry level, but I also think the compact size is key here, because this is something that we really didn't see before in the world of DSLRs. And because when you look at the images of this and the camera's just barely bigger than the mount is, I think this is going to be a really interesting travel option for when you want to carry a small, lightweight, compact camera around. In fact, you could use the pancake standard lens and even keep some dedicated Z lenses or even F lenses and adapter in your backpack for when you do have time to do a little more setup and you don't mind the weight. And I think you have a very flexible system. So if you look at the entire product range of any camera manufacturer, it's kind of like cars in a way. When you look at flagship models, so in Nikon's case, if we compared this to maybe the D5, let's say, that's a very expensive camera that is going to be very useful for professionals, but I don't think Nikon expects to sell a whole bunch of those cameras. They'll sell in the thousands, maybe the tens of thousands, but what you have to realize on the opposite end, when you have the D3000 series, this is a camera that comes in at a price point. You get a real DSLR for around $400, and they sell in the millions. So it's weird because I think the top end drives the sales, but the bottom end makes the top end possible. And I think what we're starting to see is a filling out of Nikon's mirrorless lineup, and this is actually really exciting to me. I actually think the Z50 is going to be more useful and more used than most people think. I've done this a lot with Sony cameras. I have my full frame cameras that I use for video work and stills, but when I'm traveling and I want to travel really light, or sometimes when I'm doing B-roll, I'll do overhead shots a lot of times, and I'll use my A6300, which is an APS-C size sensor. And so it really doesn't matter. It gives you something that's consistent in the lineup and something that gives you an alternative when you need a smaller body. But you can look at this a slightly different way as well. I think that Fujifilm and to a lesser extent Sony have pretty much dominated the APS-C size format for a long time. And what does the Z50 offer that those cameras don't already? So where's the customer base coming from? Is it going to be new customers? Is it going to be existing Nikon customers? Is it going to be people who switch? And I think the switching may be a little bit more of a stretch for most people. We have two dedicated lenses, and we don't have things like log profiles. We have a flip down screen. There's features that you get on other cameras that are a little more put together. But this is where I want to hear from you. What do you think of the Z50? Is this a good move for Nikon to pursue DX format? Do we have enough features in this camera to this point? What do you think of the new lenses? Or more importantly, are you going to shell out $8,000 for the Noct? Anyway, drop me a comment below. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Until then, later.